Okay, welcome back. So in this video, we will do validation on the client request to ensure that we have valid data. So let's go ahead and perform our validation. So I went ahead and I imported the validator module, a package. So I am now able to use those functions. So let's create a first function to validate our email. So I will say validate email. And of course, we know we need to pass in the validator. And we need to also pass in the email. Okay. And so the first thing I want to do is to check to see if the email was provided. Okay, and so if it was not provided, then I will need to put an entry in our map and a message like must be provided. The next thing I want to do is to check to see if the email is actually valid. So we will run it through our regex. So validator dot matches, and so I will send the email under regex. So email is the email and the regex is validator that email regex. And if that happens to be false, then I will place another entry in our map and it will have a message that says must be a valid email address. Okay, so that's all we need to do for our email validation. And notice I've decided to place the email validation into its own function so that we can call this function if we ever need it again. The next thing I want to do is to create a function that checks the password. Okay, so we want the password to be supplied, and so we want to check for that. So I'm going to have valid password and of course plain text. So this function, of course, will need the validator, and we will also pass in the password of type string. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's check. Let's check to see that the password has actually been supplied. So beta check, and so we want to see if password not the empty string. If that returns false, then we know that it has not been set, and so we'll place an entry into our map that says must be provided. Okay, so the next check we want to do is to check on the length of the password. So we will have length password, and we want to ensure that it is greater than or equal to 8 bytes. And if it's not, then we want to provide a message that says must be at least 8 bytes long. Now we also want to check that it's not more than 72 bytes. Okay, so that's another check. So we want to check that it's less than or equal to 72 bytes. Okay, and if it's not, then we want to say password must not be more than 72 bytes long. And that's all we need to do for validating the password that the user supplies. If they don't, if they supply it and it's an empty string, we will make a note of that. If it's too short, we'll make a note of that. And if it's too long, we'll make a note of that. Okay, great. So now let's move on and deal with the other validation, right? So let's create a validation function that actually deals with the other items in the response. So we're gonna have validate user, and of course we need the validator, and we will accept a user type. So we expect a user to be passed in and a pointer to that user, of course, since we want access to the data. And so we will check to see if the name has been provided. If it has not been provided, then we will again place an entry into our map. So must be provided. Okay, and we need to ensure that the name is no more than 500 bytes long. So I will simply copy this to save time. Okay, and I will not check for password. I will be checking for user name. So if user name is not less than or equals to 500 bytes, so if this test fails, then we know that it's too long. So we'll simply supply a name, and we'll say must be no more, must not be more than 500 bytes long. Okay, so once we have done that, once we have checked validated the name, then what we want to do is to validate the email. Okay, and that's easy enough. We have a function that does that. And so we'll simply call validate email. Okay, and we'll pass in user email. Okay, of course, I forgot to pass in the validator v. Okay. All right, so after we have done that, then we will need to deal with our password that the user has passed in. So let's validate the password. Of course, we need to check to see if the user has supplied the password. So if user password.plain text is not nil, right, meaning that the user has provided a password, then we can call validate password plain text, and we'll pass in the validator, and we'll pass in a pointer to this password that the user passed in, user.password.plaintext. Okay, So remember, we will only be calling validate password plain text if there is actually a password that should be validated. Okay, and once you have done that, the last thing you want to do is to ensure a hash of the password was created. Okay, so this is not something that the user will provide. So the user does not provide the hash of the password. This is something that the programmer has to deal with. And so it's not something we want to place into the error map. And so let's just check. Let's just say if user.password.hash is nil, right? Then the programmer did not do something wrong, did not do something right, or something went wrong. And so we will simply panic, because the chances of this happening is very small. And if it does happen, we want to halt the program. Okay, so missing password hash for the user. Okay, so that's all we need to do when it comes to validation. I will leave it here. And so the next thing I want to do is to actually create the user model, which will allow us to interact with our Postgres database. So we'll be starting out with insertion. So I'll see you in that next video.